I believe that the waymarks are whole years. Depending on the story, there are different dates within that year. So the third woe should be seen in the year of shipwreck of the institution as a scourge for their apostasy, for their failure, for not passing the test. I think the problem that people have with seeing Islam at the Sunday law is that neither the Bible nor Ellen White give us any information about the third woe. We don't have any of our familiar lines that show an event at the Sunday law, and it is like a hidden truth. But I believe when we look at Acts 27 and when we combine it with Acts 28, we see the east wind not only at 9/11, but also at the Sunday law. And it will empower the second and third angels' messages and also confirm our method once again. So in the presentation of the International Camp Meeting in France last year, I have shown my application of Acts 28, and I have said that we see symbols of judgment at 9/11 and also at the Sunday law waymark. Many people could not see this application to be correct because Elder Tess already made a different application. And I would like to make sure that this application of Elder Tess also in my mind is correct, but it is just another application. And Elder Tess said, what I want to do is lay out a structure without attempting to make any serious application. So she placed the third ship, the ship of Acts 28, after the second ship in Acts 27. So this is the ship of Alexandria, the first ship, and from close of probation to the second advent, Elder Tess placed the second ship from Alexandria, which is found in Acts 28. Now, what I did was I took the ship, the third ship, as a third line of the institution and lay all three lines on top of each other. So this is the second ship of Alexandria, which is found in Acts 27. And as the institution begins in 1798, I place the beginning of this ship, because it's the ship that starts in Alexandria, I place it here in 1798. The next waymark is Melita. This is where Paul enters the ship, and I would place it at 1989 because the word Melita means honey, and honey is the little book opened at the time of the end. That's why I place it at 1989. Then the next waymark is called Syracuse, and I would place this in the year 2001 or at 9/11 because it's here where Paul tarries, when the tarrying time is placed at 9/11. Then the next waymark is called Regium, and Regium means breach. I would place this waymark at 2021 because I believe that it is a symbol for January 6, when the democratic institution was damaged. It received first breaches. In Acts 27, it's the moment when the ship was almost shipwrecked, but instead they cast 4 anchors to delay the shipwreck. But the ship was already damaged. So on January 6, 2021, democracy was almost overturned, but it was still strong enough to survive, but it received first breaches. It was when Trump and his followers did not accept that they had lost the election and wanted to overturn the election outcome. They wanted to go against the votes of the people and to silence the voice of the people, and it was like a coup attempt. Elder Tess said that January 6 is part of the Exeter waymark of 2021 on the line of the 144,000. She says that January 6th is a prophetically significant event. It provides a window in America's future because of what has been done with its sins. So there is a whole year starting from January 6th that needs to be discussed. And the whole year is Exeter. And it is a window into the future of America. So 4 years later, in the future, on the day, on January 6, 2025, the same person that almost destroyed democracy in 2021 was certified to be president again. On January 20, the first days when he was in office, he pardoned the rioters of January 6, and he began purging the FBI and other federal services from all who... So January 6, 2021 and 2025 is bookended, and it's the history that is reversed in 2025. That means January 6, 2021 was the window into the future, what happened 4 years later on the day. Despite of all what Trump did, he was allowed to run as president again. He was nominated by his party. The party should have been the gatekeeper to keep extremists out, but they voted him in at the RNC in July. Then there was the election, then there was the electoral college meeting, and finally the certification. None of these democratic processes worked. And all of these democratic processes should have prevented that an extremist come to power. So all of these processes are like gatekeepers, and he came through all of these gatekeepers. The certification on January 6, 2025 would have been the final moment when any objections could have been made. But when Kamala Harris certified him without any objections by the Congress, it was done. And on January 20, on day one, as he promised, he immediately began working like a dictator and issuing a flood of undemocratic, unequal decrees. So I believe that on January 2025, which I would place at the last waymark of the ship, the institution of the USA has committed their biggest sin, finally shipwrecking democracy. In 2024, it was prepared in July and also in the following month. And in 2025, it was implemented. It's not the voters committed the sin, because it's not about the individuals yet. It's not yet their test, but it's the institution, the parties, and the democratic processes and the three branches that did not function as gatekeeper anymore. So it's the institution that is shipwrecked, and it's their close of probation at the Sunday law waymark, which I would place in January 2025. It is still a democracy on the paper, but the extremist is in power now. And the executive, the legislative, and judicial are all in his hands officially since January 20. This is the institution speaking as a dragon, because it looks like a democracy, it looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon, it speaks dictatorial. Now, another reason why I would place Regium here at 2021 is because we have the south wind there. In X27, we have the south wind at 1989, which is here on this line. But in X28, we have the south wind at Regium, which is in 2021. So we have the fall of the Soviet Union in the first line, and the fall of Russia in the second line. Now in X28, we see only the south wind, but not the east wind afterwards. But Paul knew that it is a repeating pattern. It's a rule of nature. When there is a south wind, the east wind will follow shortly after. It is just a rule, and he knew the rule. So that means when we have the south wind here, we have to have the east wind at the following waymark because we already had it in Acts 27. Also, Luke 12, verse 55 says us, when ye see the south wind blow, ye say, there will be heat, and it cometh to pass. And the word heat means in Thayer's concordance, east wind. It means euros, a very dry, hot east wind, scorching and drying up everything. So it is a rule. It is when we want to interpret the time, we have to understand when we see the south wind blow, there will be heat, which is the east wind. That means in 1989, we have the south wind, and afterwards at the next waymark, the east wind. So in 2021, we have the south wind, and at the next waymark, the east wind. Now, the final waymark of Acts 28 is called Puteoli, the city of Puteoli. Here the ship arrived. It's the end point of the ship. It's the end point of the institution. So I would mark it at the Sandelo waymark. Puteoli means sulfurous springs. And the city is placed on sulfurous springs next to a volcano in Italy. Sulfur is found in the King James Version under the antique word brimstone, and it's basically a synonym. Sulfur is the more modern word for brimstone. The word brimstone or sulfur is found at several places in the Bible, and it is connected to judgment. It points to the final judgment through close of probation. But in Revelation 9:17 and 18, we find the word brimstone as a symbol for the second woe for Islam, for the Ottoman Empire. So for us, the second woe is a parable for the third woe. It's the spiritual Ottoman Empire. Now at Puteoli, at the Sandelo waymark, which is close of probation for the ship, we have sulfur or brimstone as a symbol for judgment and for Islam. We see the east wind. So we have two witnesses. We have the east wind and we have sulfur as a judgment in connection to Islam. Shipwreck is judgment, and judgment is a scourge, and a scourge comes because of a sin, because of apostasy. The Sunday law is the end of the glorious land, and this is the sin for ending the glorious land. The woes are the scourge, and they don't yet kill the army of Rome, but they hurt it again, as they did already in 2001. Sulfur also has to do with the new method of warfare, like Uriah Smith said. I already had explained this in my presentations from the ICM from France, so I will not go over it again. As I said, we have the symbols of 2001 also at the Sandelo. Now, Syracuse is a city that is located next to a volcano in Italy. So volcano, sulfur, is symbol for judgment. And we saw 9/11 as a judgment against the army of Rome. So we have the symbol for judgment at Syracuse. We have the east wind. Then Paul tarries. And the word Syracuse means swamp. And the city is laid at the river mouth of two rivers. So similar symbols we also see at Puteoli, which is the Sandelo waymark. We see the east wind. Then we have the sulfurous spring, the city which is located next to a volcano. It's to the second volcano in Italy, which is symbol for judgment. Then Paul Terry's, also at this waymark. Paul Terry's here, Paul Terry's here. And we have also the two seas that meet at the Sunday Law, which we see in Acts 27. So we have the two rivers and the two seas. That means both waymarks have similar symbols. Now, as I have said, I believe that waymarks are a point, a special day, but also a period, which is the whole year. For example, 1798. But also 1989 and also 2001, I would say. So to understand this year, we have to look at January, because 9/11 is not only, it's the day, it's the point of this waymark, but we have to consider the whole year. And to understand this year, I would like to recommend to watch the documentary Fahrenheit 9/11 of Michael Moore and watch the first 10 minutes. Because this documentary begins with the election of 2000 between Al Gore and George W. Bush. And he is showing how the Republicans did everything to make sure to win the election. They suppressed voters in a huge scale. With the brother of Bush, who was governor of Florida, there was a lot of corruption. And as the election result was so close, they did a recount, which changed the results in favor of Al Gore, of the Democratic candidate. But the recount took too long, and so the Supreme Court decided that the recounting of Florida should be stopped and that Florida was won by the Republicans. So at the end, George Bush won, but it was a very, very small margin of only a few hundred votes. And it was a very controversial decision. So on January 6, 2001, the election result was to be certified. Several Congress people and especially Black Congress women brought their objections, but no senator helped them to sign their objection. Therefore, the objections were not valid and the Congress people were silenced. At the end, Bush was certified as president. Now, there were 3 young lawyers back then who came to Florida to assist George Bush in this Supreme Court case and help them to win the Supreme Court case and therefore also win the election. And these young lawyers back then were Amy Coney Barrett, John Roberts, and Brett Kavanaugh. And all 3 are today sitting in the Supreme Court. So there is another connection between 2001 and today. January 6, 2001 was a crucial day for the institution of the USA. They certified someone as president who did not rightfully win the election. And this is not my words, but it's like Michael Moore portrays it. And Michael Moore was considered by the movement, by Elder Tess, to be the prophet for the Netherlands, to be their first messenger. We don't agree with everything what he says, and he is the first messenger, not the second messenger anymore. But back then, I think he has to be taken serious. And that's why I really recommend to rewatch the first 10 minutes. Now, other people also did extensive researches about this election and came to the same conclusion, that this election back then was not fair and not free. There was a lot of voter suppression. Many people protested at the inauguration day in January 2001 because they felt that their voices had not been heard. In my opinion, it's all about voting. This is the most fundamental principle of democracy, to let the people decide who they want as their representative. This is equality, that everyone has the same right, the same access to give their vote. Now, George Bush, in his first months in office, he did a very bad job and did not have much support by the people. The country was very much divided, and Bush had very low approval ratings. But then happened 9/11, and after 9/11, this changed completely. In the book How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Sieblatt, we can read that crises are hard to predict, but their political consequences are not. They facilitate the concentration and very often abuse of power. Wars and terrorist attacks produce a rally around the flag effect, in which public support for the government increases, often dramatically. In the aftermath of September 11, President Bush saw his approval rating soar from 53%, which is very low for a president in the first time in the office. It soared to 90%, the highest figure ever recorded by Gallup. So this is very important to note. He was not he had not much support before 9/11 by the people. But after 9/11, everyone supported him because in a crisis, people want a strong leader. The combination of a would-be authoritarian and a major crisis can therefore be deadly for democracy. This is how they portray it. So September 11 is really the turning point. When a dictator comes to power, he needs a crisis. He needs a national crisis. Then he can legitimate his authoritarian style of leadership. Then the people accept it. Michael Moore, in his documentary, shows first the controversial election and certification of George Bush in 2001, and then 9/11. It really looks like cause and effect as he portrays it. We could also say sin and scourge. At the certification of George Bush, the institution committed a big sin. I really recommend to rewatch it. 9/11 was the east wind hitting the ship, the institution, because of the sin. There must be a sin when there is a scourge. And the sin, in my understanding, and also if I'm correctly understanding Michael Moore, is bringing a president to power in an unfair election and without the clear majority of the voters. Now, we saw already that the Sunday Law movement is beginning to be formed during our reform line. So in 1979, with the Moral Majority and the Heritage Foundation, with Reagan, it all began already. And George Bush also was part of this in overturn democracy. In my understanding, as I said, democracy gets overturned when the voices of the people are silenced. In other words, this is voter suppression. Then it is not we the people anymore, and then this country is not glorious anymore. So the history of voting rights should not be new to us. Also, Elder Terry talked about it in her studies in May last year. Justice Hugo Black in 1964 said, "No right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws, under which, as good citizens, we must live." Another justice said, "The right to vote freely for the candidate of one's choice is of the essence of a democratic society, and any restrictions on that right strike at the heart of representative government." Undoubtedly, the right of suffrage is a fundamental matter in a free and democratic society. Now, the leader of the Heritage, or the co-founder of the Heritage Foundation, Paul Weyrich, said, I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, he continued, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. So he knows it. He knows that the majority of the people are not Republican, they are Democratic. He knows that he has to suppress the votes of minority groups, because if he would not do this, the country would not vote for them. They would not vote for the Republicans. Also, Peter Thiel said, he is the mentor of J.D. Vance. He said that we should not have women voting because they overwhelmingly vote for Democrats. Also, Donald Trump was very open about what he was doing. He said that if you make it easier to vote, a Republican would never be elected again. He said they had things, levels of voting, that if you would ever agree to it, you would never have a Republican elected in this country again. The speechwriter of George W. Bush said, if conservatives become convinced that they cannot win democratically, they will not abandon conservatism. They will reject democracy. So in a dictatorship, it's a minority that is ruling over the majority. The Republicans don't even want the votes. They don't want to be voted by the people, because then they can be voted out again. Then they depend on the will of the people. So across the USA, Republican lawmakers have introduced hundreds of bills in many states to restrict voter access. The Republican Party has no interest in appealing to a majority of Americans. Instead, they are doubling down on anti-democratic tactics so they can get a minority of votes but have a majority of power. It's the biggest rollback on voting rights in decades, and it's extremely shocking to read how especially votes of Blacks and women are suppressed in the last years. Now back to the election of 2000. In my understanding of all of this, George Bush and the Republicans cheated themselves to power before and after this controversial election of 2000. This was their biggest sin. And at the certification of 2001, the sin was finally manifested. If we had more time, we could go through all the details and numbers, but you can do also your own researches on this. So the most precious right in a free country is having a voice in the election. It all begins by suppressing the votes of the people. Voting is having a voice. Everybody should have a voice. Everybody should be able to vote freely without any obstacle. And finally, every voice should be counted. Otherwise, it would not be equal, but patriarchal. And this means for me, pretending to be a lamb, pretending to uphold democracy and equality, but in reality, speaking as a dragon, acting dictatorial and having a patriarchal system. Also, Ellen White says about the lamb-like horns and the dragon voice that it is the striking contradiction between the profession and the practice of the nation thus represented. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. So the sin is controlling the consciences of the people, and I would interpret this as not letting them choose whom they want as their representatives, which is, in other words, suppressing their votes and ruling against them or ruling over them against their will. I think the Republicans are the minority that are ruling over the majority. As already explained, we have had the election in 2000, which was not free and not fair. We had in 2016 also an election that was not free and fair because there was Russian interference. Hillary Clinton had won the popular vote, so we cannot say a woman would have never the chance to win an election. It is the system that does not let her win. In 2021, or in 2020, the election was also not free and fair. Biden won, but nevertheless, there was cheating by the Republicans. That's why Trump did not believe the results and wanted to find the votes. It is not a conspiracy that they had problems with the votes counting computers and software, and there was definitely voter suppression. But the cheating was on the side of the Republicans and not of the Democrats. The Republicans just failed. So the Republicans issued hundreds of laws that made it more difficult for minorities to vote. Why should they do this if they would win fairly and freely anyway, if everybody would have voted for them? So in the Sunday law, as we are in now, as I believe, the world is sexist and patriarchy is ruling. A woman could have never won the election at the Sunday law. This is also clear for me. But it's not because she does not get votes. It's because the whole system is corrupted. And the Republicans would never let a woman into power. It's the test of the institution, not of the people, not of the voters. So it's the institution that failed the test. We look now at the election of 2024. So November 5, 2024, the day of the election, was exceptional because the results were so quickly published. It was such a clear win for Trump. He won 100% of the swing states and also the popular vote. The Democrats and the media all agreed that it was a fair and free election. It looked like the people clearly wanted Trump and Harris had no chance. It looked like democracy was strong. In the movement, many said, yes, this is what we expected. At the Sunday law, the majority will vote for a man, for Trump, and a woman can never win this election. But to be honest with you, I don't believe that this is true. The Republicans win by cheating. We have examples from history. It's nothing new. We know the hundreds of voter suppression laws. We know gerrymandering. We know how the Republicans manipulate and cheat. There's also Project 2025, where they laid out the whole plan. They took all precautions to guarantee that this election will be won. There are many reports and documentaries about especially Blacks and other groups such as blue female students that vote normally for the Democrats. And they are being suppressed from voting, and it got worse in the last years. So the definition of a fair and free election, according to Wikipedia, is a free and fair election involves political freedoms and fair processes leading up to the vote, a fair count of eligible voters who cast a ballot, a lack of electoral fraud or voter suppression, and acceptance of election results by all parties. So just if we look alone at the voter suppression laws, how can everybody say the election was fair when it even does not comply the definition of a fair and free election? And also when we look at the life and character of Trump, he wins by cheating all his life. Why should he win the biggest thing in his life by being fair and honest? It just cannot be the case. The historian Heather Cox Richardson said in 2020, "You don't take away the drop boxes if you think that people want the policies that you are advocating. You don't suppress the vote if you think what you're doing is popular. You don't try and shut people up if you think that they are going to be speaking for you. You don't go out there and lie about all your policies if you think people actually want them. So all these strategies to suppress voters, to restrict voters, have a disproportionate impact on minority communities. In my understanding, a democracy is fallen when a minority of rich and influential people is ruling over the majority. This is a dictatorship, even if it still looks like a democracy. And again, I don't deny that the majority is sexist and also that far too many like Trump. We see patriarchy gets more and more popular all over the world, but the majority does not want to be suppressed by an authoritarian leadership. The majority wants freedom. I think also the polls confirm this. There are journalists and organizations that are fighting since many years for fair and free elections. They are analyzing the elections for years and have a lot of experience in this. And their mission is make sure that people can trust in fair elections, which is the foundation of a functioning democracies. One of those organizations is called smartelections.us. You can check their website. They have very interesting articles and researches. And they have found serious concerns about the 2024 election. And after all that we learned about the Republicans and Trump, I have no doubt that what these organizations say is true. I think even if we were not in the movement, but were just citizens who care about democracy and our right to vote, even then we should stand up for truth and not believe the lies of a dictator. He is a cheater. We can check all the voter suppression measurements, and by definition, the election was not free and fair. So these organizations found clear evidence. I will not read all those points that they have, but I will share my notes later. You can read it in your own time. And they wrote letters to Harris still in November to call for a recount in several swing states because of serious concerns. Then there is a security expert who wrote a letter in November 15 to Kamala Harris. And he also said, you should reverse your concession, call for both a full investigation of criminal activity and demand hand recounts in all 7 swing states. In my professional view, there are multiple and extremely clear indications the presidential vote was willfully compromised. He says, the result of the attack are improbable in the extreme and well tailored to the sole benefit of your opponent. So Kamala Harris knew back then, directly after or shortly after the election, that there were issues with the election, and she was called or urged to call for an investigation and for a recount if the election result is really true and fair and free, happened fair and freely. Now there's another organization called Election Truth Alliance, and they did extensive analysis of the election data and found serious concerns about manipulation. It's worth to check also their website. They also bring new YouTube videos on updates of their researches, and they are also fighting in different lawsuits, and they find serious concerns about the election result. The next one is Greg Palast. He is an investigative journalist, and he has expertise in election investigation since 25 years. He already investigated the 2000 election and found that there are voter suppression in a huge scale. He did a very good documentary on the history of vote suppression and Jim Crow, and it is very well researched, and I recommend to watch it. Here's the link. It's called Vigilantes Inc. That's the name of the documentary. And so this journalist, you can also check his website. He has several articles about elections back then, but also about this current election. And he also found serious concerns. He said, as Bush versus Gore in 2000 and in too many other miscarriages of democracy, this election was determined by good old vote suppression, the polite term we use for shafting people of color out of their ballot. We used to call it Jim Crow. Here are the key numbers. And he is now calculating how many voters has been suppressed, how many people had not the possibility to vote. And he is calculating how many votes this means for Harris to have lost. And his result is that Harris would have won the election if every vote has been counted, and if everyone who wanted to vote had the possibility to vote. He says, the nasty little secret of American democracy is that we don't count all the votes nor let every citizen vote. Also, this article is interesting to read. I want just to read the last sentence here. If these vote suppression laws had no effect on election outcomes, then why did GOP legislators fight so hard to pass these laws? The answer is clear on the Brennan Center's map of states that passed restrictive laws. It's pretty much Trump's victory map. And this is the map. So all these blue-colored states had passed restrictive voting laws between 21 and 24, and almost all of these states Trump won. So it is clear, why would they have needed those vote suppression laws? It is to make sure that they win the election. Again, the historian Heather Cox Richardson said in 2025 in a YouTube interview that since 2021, for example, 34 states cut back on voting rights. And we look at 2024 and people say, well, you know, why didn't Black people show up for 2024? So why didn't enough people go to the election and vote for Harris? And then she says, and they don't put that together with the fact that we have had these voter suppression laws. And these have been going into play in America, as I say, since 1986. But they really dramatically take off in 1998, when Florida throws about 100,000 people off the voting rolls right before the 2000 election. Well, how many votes did the 2000 election come down to? It was a few hundred votes only. So she says 100,000 people were dropped off the rolls in 1998, right before the 2000 election, and that has been multiplying ever since then. We are getting rid of the idea of free and fair elections. People simply find they are unable to vote. Their votes get discounted, their votes get challenged for one thing or another. I think we should take that serious. It should not come as a surprise to us that the election was definitely not fair. And even if the Democrats and the media told us so, how can we believe that the Republicans played fairly this time and risk to lose the election? When they say even things like the following, just as one example, this was Trump on January 19, who said, Elon Musk knows those computers better than anybody, all those computers, those vote counting computers, and we ended up winning Pennsylvania in a landslide. Thank you, Elon. So I believe that the Democrats should definitely have called for an investigation before January 6th, before they certified the election results. Kamala Harris certified a demagogue into office. The Republican Party brought him up when they did not function as gatekeepers anymore, but Harris certified him at the final end. And at the end, the Democrats did not fight anymore. They surrendered to their fate and they compromised. I think we can compare it to 1850. The South was pro-slavery and therefore bad since the beginning. The North was against slavery, but compromised for the sake of the Union. With that, they committed a huge sin. I think if the Democrats would not have accepted the election results now, there would have been violence and possibly the Civil War already beginning. But they had to accept the election result for the sake of the Union. They had to compromise. But with that, democracy was finally shipwrecked because both parties then failed. Even though it still looks like a democracy, it's not comparable to a real dictatorship like North Korea. And we know also it will remain a lamp. It will remain looking as a democracy, but it's not a functioning democracy anymore. It does not speak like a lamp anymore. President did on day one, he was acting like a dictator and issuing a flood of decrees, and even beginning a kind of persecution against equality. Therefore, I believe January 2025 is the starting point of the Sunday Law. It's the beginning of the Sunday Law period. The Democrats were not able to say that the election was rigged because they would have repeated his lie from 2020. They assured back then that the vote counting systems worked well, so they could not admit now that there are definitely security breaches and that this should be investigated. Trump made it so clever in spreading the narrative of a stolen election back then. He already made it so the Democrats could not use this same phrase 4 years later, when the election was indeed stolen by him. So it was a very clever strategy and it worked perfectly. The rule number 1 in the narcissist playbook is blame the victims for what you yourself are guilty of. So he cheated in 2020 already, but he lost. That's why he refused to believe the result. Imagine if he had lost in 2024 again. He was convicted of several crimes. Elon Musk said, we have to win or we go to jail. That means they just could not leave the outcome to the voters. Now I'm coming to my conclusion. So the question is, what should we do now? We could say we trust the mainstream media and not those independent journalists or organizations, and say they rather spreading a conspiracy of a rigged election and repeating the conspiracy that Trump spread 4 years earlier. But I would argue we are living in an information warfare. We know that the media is not so independent anymore. We already saw that Jeff Bezos changed the Washington Post, for example. And as I said, the Democrats will not admit that the election was not fair. There is no way back for them. Both parties failed completely. So we rely on those organizations who are doing a great and brave work to research and find the truth, to reveal what is really happening behind the curtains. You can do your own researches and read all those sources, check the numbers. I think we should believe them instead of believing the lie of Trump. Because we also know the character of the King of the North. It says in Daniel 11:23 that after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. That means the character of the king of the north is that he works deceitfully. He does not win fairly and freely. Based on Acts 27 and Acts 28, I was certain that Trump would not be elected by the majority of the people, but that he will nevertheless be certified as president. The majority would vote for Harris, but they will not let her into power. Instead, Trump will be certified. Now, January 6, 2001 was pointing to January 6, 2025. A president was certified who was not elected in a fair and free election. Now, November 5 looked a bit different than I expected because they won the election so clearly and the result was public on the first day, on election day. It was so soon. That's why it was so exceptional. But this was only because they made it so clever and prepared it in advance. They knew another insurrection and violence would not be successful because the Democrats were prepared for that. So their election result really looked as if the majority wanted him. But this is a great deception, in my opinion. By definition, it's a lie that the election was free and fair. In summary, the sin of the institution at the Sunday law of both parties was committed on January 6, 2025. And I want to clarify that I'm talking about the line of the institution here. For the institution, it's not the Sunday law, but it's the close of probation. In this study, I wanted to show with the line of Acts 28 that we have the same characteristics at 2001, which is here, and at the Sunday law waymark, which is here. We see problematic election outcomes at both waymarks. Election of 2000 and election of 2024 that was certified on January 6, 2001 and on January 6, 2025. Then also 2021 is Exeter for the Sunday law, and January 6, 2021 is a window to the future of America. It was almost shipwreck here, but they dropped the 4 anchors and certified Biden and Harris into office. So they had 4 more years to fight for democracy. And also the Republicans had 4 years to prepare the takeover of the government. Voter suppression is the big fundamental sin of a democratic country, of the glorious land, pretending to uphold democracy while speaking as a dragon. Voter suppression is an attack against equality. Not only against Black people, but also against women. There is a new voter suppression law in the pipeline that is called the SAFE Act, and this will affect especially married women who change their last names. They will find it much harder to be able to vote. I suggest that we see the manifestation of that sin in 2025 with the certification and inauguration of a dictator after an election that was not fair. I wanted to show that the King of the North works deceitfully and does not win fairly. The institution receives the mark of the beast at this first Sunday law waymark, but not yet the individuals. They will receive it here later. In my opinion, July 2024 belongs to Exeter. It was a prediction, a foreshadowing to what happened in January 2025, when both parties bring him into office. In the next study, I want to look at the east wind as a scourge and bring this together with the sin. So we will close with a word of prayer. Let's kneel down. Dear God, I thank you that we could study together. I ask you that you guide our thoughts when we think and talk about these things, when we try to understand it, when we try to answer our questions and also bring it together with the other Sunday law studies. Please guide us and be with us. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much. So, I think, well, oh, let me